that you're going through, so you can see what's in the room, but you can't go near it at all. All you can do is to keep your guide in your hand, see which room you're in, and see what you're looking at. If you stop to look at the guide, you feel this pressure of more people moving on behind you. You might just as well be on a moving stair, a moving platform, taking you through automatically. Now, commercially, this is an enormous success because it allows you to get as many people as you possibly could each hour through these rooms of Buckingham Palace, which is in effect a big museum. But from the point of view of the quality of the visit, it's hopeless. I believe myself that the only two kinds of museums that are going to survive and prosper into the next century. The first is what I call museums with charm. Now, this, for example, would be the house in which Picasso lived. It would be the laboratory in which Pasteur worked. Places which are identified with one individual. And these don't cost much to run. They don't need very large numbers of people to attend them. They're mostly in districts where people want to go, in pleasant parts of the country. And I think they are going to survive. Now, on the other extreme, the ones that are going to survive are what I call the museums with chairs. Because information you can get in so many ways nowadays. You can get it through your computer, you can get it through any kind of pictorial system available through the computer. And you don't need to go to a museum in order to get this information. What you can't get without going to it is the opportunity to discuss what's there with other people and to ask questions about those things. And in order to do that properly, you need to be able to sit down. It's not easy to discuss something standing up all the time. And I think that museums which are built around easily portable, easily movable chairs, large numbers of them, are going to have very high survival value. I've been to one of these quite recently at Umeå in the north of Sweden, which is the University Museum of Pictures. They don't call it the Art Museum, they call it the Museum of Pictures. And in this museum, you pick up, when you go in, a chair. It's a very easy chair to carry. It's very light. It's a sort of stool, if you like. And then when you want to stop in front of a picture in order to look at it, you can sit there for half an hour if you want to. You don't have to stand up. You don't have to move on. And in order to appreciate a work of art, you need to be able to do that. And it demands a chair to do it. Equally, at the new Museum of Science and Technology in Amsterdam, which opened in June of this year, the architect was instructed to design the museum around chairs. That's to say, there would be in every part of the museum large numbers of chairs which could be moved about. There would be personnel who were good at provoking discussion, good at answering questions. And when this person sees a group of people obviously interested in something, he or she will bring them together, bring the number of chairs together. It could be 20, it could be 50, it could be 6. And they will then sit down and discuss and ask questions about it. The museum has only had one real source of trouble, and that was with the fire authorities that said you can't have chairs put in places where, if there's a fire, people can't get out of the building. So you have to have lines, and so you mustn't put any chairs the other side of that line, but otherwise you're free to put them. And I think these two kinds of museum will survive and do well into next century. The museums with charm and the museums with chairs. The museums that are going to be in great difficulties are going to be in the places that exist in order to give information. All museums will, of course, give some information, but the information places that have no charm and no chairs, I think, are going to find life rather difficult. Now, in order to assess the public value of a museum, I think there are 4 or 5 qualities that we need to think about, and I hope you'll discuss this. I wish I were with you to discuss it myself, because I think they're extremely important. You have to say, first of all, has the museum got interesting things to show? If you go to it, have you got interesting things to see? Second, you have to say, are they well interpreted? Are they well presented in an interesting way? Then you have to say, what is the atmosphere of the museum like? Is it friendly and welcoming, or is it cold and clinical? There are both kinds of museum, and you'll all know both sorts. You'll then have to say, what are the physical amenities like? For example, is it easy to park a car outside? Is it easy to leave a wet hat or coat? Is there a good restaurant or cafe in the museum? Are there places where you can sit down and rest when you get tired walking about the place? All these, together with the museum shop where you can buy things, represent the public quality of a museum. And another very important part of this public quality is the public relations and the publicity of the museum. Does it reach out into the local community? Does it put its fingers into the local community? Because a museum doesn't know whether it's doing its job, where it's meeting the needs of its visitors, unless it's all the time doing research into who those people are. And I want to say something about that research for a moment. Museums, particularly the bigger ones, have been doing for many, many years a standard kind of market research, so that they discover quite easily by means of questionnaire forms, where did you come from, how did you get here, how old are you, what sort of school did you go to. They know all that sort of thing. But what they don't know is the much more personal things which you can only find out unexpectedly by talking to people. Now, I have visited quite recently 2 museums in Switzerland that seem to me extremely well placed to find out what each individual visitor thinks. And the way they do it is this. One of these museums has managed to get the money to appoint a very superior kind of administrative secretary, who will in fact do most of the work that the old type of museum curator used to do. There will be a person in an office, and this frees the museum director or curator to walk around the shop, so to speak, and meet the customers, to spend many hours a day actually walking around, talking to people, listening to them, hearing what they say, breaking into their conversations. If you go to another museum, they found another solution in Switzerland. They have a man who walks around with a big badge on here that says walking information, information ambulante. And this is a very friendly looking man. He looks like everybody's uncle. And he will answer any question that anybody cares to ask him about the museum in general, about particular aspects of the museum. And if he doesn't know, he will go to the telephone and ring up one of his colleagues and say, can you come down and help me? I've got someone with a question that I can't answer. Now, either of these 2 methods seems to me to meet the demands made on a museum, because you cannot say that all people who come to museums have the same questions to ask, are interested in the same things. You never know what they're going to be interested in, and you've got to be prepared for unexpected things at any moment. So that I think, to try and get a little closer to answering this question of museums, yes or no, the answer is it depends what kind of museums they are. I think the answer is museums, yes, is the museums where the public quality is high. And you'll gather what I mean by that. I mean museums that think of their visitors first and of the people who work in the museums second. If it's nowadays, if museums don't seem to exist mainly for the people who go there and visit them, they're not doing their job. And I think a museum which exists only for the sake of the people who work in it, to provide a living for them, the answer has to be no. It has no right to exist under today's conditions. I'll give an example of what I mean. 3 years ago, I went to a new museum in the center of Germany. It was on a fine day in June. The museum was in a nice park, and the day was a Wednesday. And I went there at 9 o'clock, and I spent 4 hours there with the director, going around talking to him. During those 4 hours, there was not one single visitor to the museum. So at the end of the morning, I said to him, "You've got a problem." "What problem?" he said. Well, I said, "Nobody's been here. I'm the only person here." So he said, "I haven't got a problem. The public's got a problem. It's open, they can come. If they don't come, that's their problem. It's not my problem." Now, I haven't followed this up. I don't know whether he's still in the same job, because it's one of the sad facts, if you like, of today's museum world, that the people who provide the money will, as we say in English, call the tune. That is to say, they will ask what you're doing to justify spending these large amounts of money. Now, if the museum is entirely run on private money, that's to say, perhaps it's sponsored, or perhaps it's dependent entirely on what people pay to come into it, or the profit on the restaurant or the shop, they know when they're succeeding or not, because if they're not succeeding, they eventually go bankrupt. But if the museum is run on public money, or mainly on public money, you will find there are officials, perhaps as high as ministers, but usually further down, who say, "Tell me what you're doing so that we should give this money to you and not to some other equally deserving cause." And that's where the problem comes. In asking this question, museums yes or no, I think you're thinking mainly of the second kind of museum, one that's getting its money from public funds. Now, you can give them the usual answer that we've been giving the officials for years, that any country has a duty to preserve its historic material. It should do that. It should do it as a matter of national honor. If it simply allows it to disappear and throw away, it's not doing its duty. But you see, it could be doing that without admitting the public. It could be doing it by putting it into stores, in looking after it, but not going to this colossal expense of admitting the public, making it interesting for them, providing all the things that the public demands. I will bring this discussion, I hope it has been a discussion, I hope it will lead to a discussion on your part, by putting one question that I'm quite sure that it's going to be impossible to be in charge of any kind of museum in the next 10, 20 years without spending a lot of time thinking about where the money is coming from. And that's unavoidable. That means that a museum with a director that doesn't have a commercial instinct, commercial sense, is going to find himself or herself in great difficulties. It isn't going to be sufficient at all simply to say, I know all about paintings, or I know all about furniture, all about natural history. You've got to say at the same time, I've got to have a good business sense. But, and I want to make this my last word, I went some years ago to a museum in Croatia, in the town of Varaždin. Now, Varaždin was the old capital of the country at one time. And there I was talking to the woman who was in charge not only of this museum, but of all the museums in the town. A very intelligent, very nice woman. And I said to her, what is the most important duty that you have? And she said, well, you know my country, it's poor, we're surrounded by ugliness, war, we're surrounded by poverty, we're surrounded by misery of all kinds. My first duty is to provide in each museum what she called an island of beauty. An island of beauty in a sea of ugliness. And she said, do you think I'm doing that? Yes, I said, I think you do, but how do you do it? She said, well, I do it in two ways. First, I will only appoint women as my colleagues. I won't employ any men at all. Because, she said, women look on the collections as if they were their children, and they want to make the children look good when they go out in public, so to speak. They present their children at their best. I said, yes, that's the first thing you do. You only appoint women. And what's the second thing? She said, I will never appoint a designer, because the designer gets in between the collections and the public, people who come to see them. She said, I much prefer to leave my own staff to do the design work and to make sure that they are capable of doing it. And she said, if I do that, then I think I've got a chance of creating islands of beauty. Now, I believe this very strongly.